Now to Singapore because Air Force One, Donald Trump's plane, is just arriving there at the Paya Lebar Air Base in Singapore ahead of that crucial summit with Kim Jong-un, which will begin on Tuesday morning to talk about the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. Donald Trump there, who has flown from another summit, the G7 summit, which ended in some disarray after a row over trade tariffs, a predictable row in many ways, and Donald Trump at the end of that G7 summit really putting out a tweet in which he denounced the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau as weak and dishonest, and Mr. Trump also saying that he was refusing, after all, to endorse the communique, the joint communique between the G7 leaders that it had been thought he had endorsed, a communique about free and fair trade. So Mr. Trump clearly angered by what Justin Trudeau had said, which was that Canada wouldn't be pushed around on trade. Anyway, he's now moved on from that G7 summit and he's arrived in Singapore for talks which at one stage seemed pretty unthinkable, really, between him and Kim Jong-un. And those two men have also, of course, exchanged plenty of insults. But more recently, this summit, this on-again, off-again summit, has looked like it is on again, and it is definitely happening on Tuesday. And on the agenda is whether North Korea will give up its nuclear weapons. So it's a crucial summit, not only for the Korean Peninsula, but really for all of Asia and all of the world, which has felt so threatened by the nuclear program of the North Koreans. Donald Trump in Air Force One, arriving at the Paya Lebar Air Base in Singapore. And he won't meet Kim Jong-un immediately, but Tuesday morning is when that summit will start.
Let's bring in Dr. Robert Kelly, who is our expert who's going to be with us over the course of the next few days. He is Professor of Political Science at the Pusan National University in South Korea. As you watch these pictures, we get sort of a flavour of just how unprecedented this is. A sitting US president meeting the leader of what, until very recently, was an isolated state.
Sure, yeah, and it's a big deal. I mean, there's a reason why this has never happened before. The United States is closely allied to South Korea, right? We've wanted for a long time not to recognize North Korea because we wanted to symbolize or suggest that South Korea is the real Korea and that North Korea is an aberrant state. Donald Trump is breaking with that, and that's why it's something of a gamble, as we talked about before, right? If he can actually get some kind of deal out of the North Koreans for this big gamble, then that would actually be pretty great, right? But there's a lot of question on whether or not he'll do it. But it certainly is taking a bit of a risk, right? Because we have not, we purposely have avoided talking to the North Koreans for many years.
Before he came here, in his meetings with Shinzo Abe, the Japanese Prime Minister, on Thursday, he said, I'm as prepared as I need to be.
Right.
This is all about attitude.
Right.
Whether there is a willingness to do a deal.
Right.
How do you feel about that, having studied the complexities of nuclear deterrence in North Korea, nuclear disarmament in North Korea?
I mean, it's a little worrisome because if we don't get sort of total denuclearization, if the North Koreans come in there and they want a deal, they want to discuss, they want to have a negotiator back and forth, then Donald Trump is going to need to know something about these issues. He's actually going to have to be able to debate what do the North Koreans have and how much and where is it and how powerful it is and how far the missiles can fly and things like that. All this stuff is pretty complicated, right? Missile technology is not something that regular people sort of know a lot about, and that's the concern, right? The president said he's not really prepared very much, so if we don't, if there's not an immediate breakthrough and it turns into negotiation, the concern is that the president is just not ready for it.
Steps going up to the door. Of course, keep an eye on that just to see when President Trump appears. In terms of what they have, I mean, for people who are coming to this the North Korean debate, do we know what they have, and should we be worried about it?
Sure. I think it's certainly accepted now that they have nuclear weapons, right? I mean, this is sort of, that's over. The question now is just how big are the nuclear weapons? It looks like the weapon that was, the most recent test was of a weapon that was 20 times the size of the one that the Americans used in Hiroshima. And then the North Koreans also have missiles on which they can put these weapons, and we don't know how many there. It looks like several hundred at least, including ones that have range long enough to hit the United States.
And when we talk about the bomb that was exploded in September last year, if that was a hydrogen bomb, that's pretty serious, because there's only a small number of countries, I think it's five or six that have a hydrogen bomb.
Right.
Can the world live with a nuclearized North Korea?
Yeah, and this is the big question, right? Is that, I mean, I think what people like President Trump would have said last year when he was talking about fire and fury was that this is not actually a state that we can live with. North Korea is too unique, it's too bizarre, it's too Orwellian, if you will. It's 1984 now with nuclear weapons, and we should be genuinely scared. But it's also the case that during the Cold War, we learned to live with the Soviet Union with nuclear weapons. China got nuclear weapons during the Cultural Revolution, which was a pretty scary time. So we have adapted. My own sense is we can adapt to North Korea with nuclear weapons, but it is certainly the most dangerous state in the system with nuclear weapons. That is very true.
These two leaders, they are quite similar. They are prone to angry outbursts.
Right.
They're unpredictable. They're nationalist.
Right.
And President Trump has already said, I'll suss this out in 5 minutes, whether he wants to do a deal or not.
Right.
Does that worry you? Because when you look at previous negotiations that have gone on, summits, there's been summits at the lower level, and then you bring in the leader.
Right.
That's the intention. You bring in the leader at the last minute. Now we're doing everything up front with a leader who we know doesn't pay as much attention to the detail as some would like.
Yeah, and I think that's also been one of the concerns from the analyst community going back to the very beginning. I mean, I think I said this on BBC actually the same day that President Trump announced the meeting. 3 months is probably just not enough time to hammer out these really difficult issues. If you look at the six-party talks a few years ago, about 10 years ago, right, that took a couple of years, and it still didn't really come through, right? We've been talking to North Koreans on-off in various different ways, in various formats, through the UN and so on, going back to the 1990s about nuclear weapons, and it would be amazing if President Trump could sort of push through all that in just a few months.
The doors are open. We should see the President in the next minute or so. Here he is. Here is President Trump. He's just about to come out through the doors. I should say, there he is, just appearing. Not with a red tie this time, with the blue tie. A special tie for the occasion. It's an unprecedented tie. Maybe a blue tie is right for the occasion, who knows. I should say that all the paraphernalia that comes in with the president has already arrived. It's been going on for the last few days. If you've been here in Singapore, you would see people painting the roads, they've been cutting the vegetation, they've been improving everything, the Secret Service has been here. That car that he's about to get in, that comes in early on other Globemasters, on the Boeing C-17s. All that was flown in yesterday. And there is a certain choreography this evening, so he's going to be transported here from the Paya Lebar Air Base, which is quite near to the Changi Air Base where Kim Jong-un came in early today, across the island to the diplomatic quarter. He's staying near the Orchard Road. If you know Singapore, it's the main shopping district in the Shangri-La Hotel. In fact, you were at the Shangri-La Hotel, weren't you?
That's right.
Just recently for the Shangri-La Dialogue.
That's right.
And I presume that one of the things they were talking about was North Korea.
That's right. There was a whole long session about it, and the defense minister of Japan and South Korea both spoke to this, and this question of whether or not the North Koreans would give up everything came up. I actually asked a question about this myself, and the big debate is if the North Koreans won't go completely to zero, complete verifiable irreversible disarmament, CVID, what will they give us, and what will we be prepared to negotiate a way for that? Will we give them sanctions relief, aid? Will we give them some removal of American forces? Things like that. Yeah,
so we've just seen him wave and get into the car there, and going into the other cars, as I say, is Mike Pompeo, the new Secretary of State, who's been twice to Pyongyang. Also, interestingly, on the plane, and we've talked a bit about him recently, John Bolton, the National Security Advisor, quite hawkish, Robert.
Right, definitely.
Right. I mean, as hawkish as it comes. Sure. When it comes to North Korea.
Sure, and that's been one of the concerns too, sort of lurking in the background in a couple of months, the last few months, when and Advisor Bolton talked about the Libya model. The North Koreans know what happened to Muammar Gaddafi. He ended pretty badly, and there was a sort of sneaking suspicion out there that Advisor Bolton threw that out there in part to sabotage the talks, because the advisor has said repeatedly in the Wall Street Journal and other places that we should strike North Korea. And so there's a bit of anxiety that maybe Bolton wants this thing to fail, because then that gives him the room to say, we should strike North Korea. We tried talks, didn't work, now we have to, try kinetic options.
when you get to something like this, and we've talked about the short lead-up time, they've had, what, just 3 months?
Right.
And of course, a lot of people are worried about the preparations that goes into it. But is there some material that you can pick up from previous negotiations that are applicable here, as we just watch the convoy moving out of the airport?
Yeah, I think that's right, and that's, again, if I think some of this may be just the president's unwillingness to sort of like harken back to people who came before him. It's pretty obvious, for example, that Donald Trump doesn't like President Obama, for example. But I mean, there was work done during the Obama administration on a deal in 2012. Bill Clinton's administration had a deal with the North Koreans called the Agreed Framework. George W. Bush worked on something called the Six-Party Talks. So there is sort of a long history of negotiation with them, and hopefully some of that can get picked up and used and repurposed, so the president isn't starting completely from zero in just, you know.
That is the interesting point, isn't it? For all the criticism that he has of Presidents Obama and George W. Bush, they should have done something about this, and they didn't. They left it on my plate. Let's not forget that what he has been promised thus far by the North Korean side, denuclearization, both Obama and George W. Bush had the same promise.
Sure. And we've all been working on this issue going back to the early 1990s. So
what more do you need to see then, rather than, I mean, this will, of course, it will be a bit of grip and grim,
right?
And there'll be the photo opportunity. But if this is concrete, what more do you need to see apart from the process and the promises of we're going to denuclearize?
Yeah, and I mean, there you're getting really to the heart of it. I mean, there's been a lot of symbolism in the last 6 months. You know, they had the Olympics and the Inter-Korean Summit and this and that, and now we're having all of this too. And I mean, there's a lot of pomp and circumstance, but eventually we need to sort of get beyond that and actually get into the real substance of the debate. You got to start talking about, you know, what do they have? Where is it? How many missiles? You know, do they have any kind of doctrine for nuclear weapons use? We don't really know what the red lines are at all. We don't know how safe it is. There are concerns about, like, a Chernobyl in North Korea, for example. This is something I've worried about in my writing. I mean, there are a lot of ways for us to negotiate with them and get into the nitty-gritty and the details. And again, this is the concern that the president hasn't spent a lot of time on this stuff, because, you know, it's probably going to be a push and pull, a give and take, and they're not just going to give us.
So short of denuclearization, if you could get some information on what you actually have, tell us what you have. What is the control and command of what you have? What do you do with your nuclear waste? All these sort of things. That would be valuable information.
That's right,
and that's a concession.
That's right. I mean, the North Koreans aren't going to give us anything without something, right? I mean, anything they give us, they're going to spend as a concession and demand something, cash aid or sanctions relief or something. My own sense is they probably won't give us very much on the missiles or the nukes now. Maybe they can give us some information, sort of like, again, what they have, where is it. Safety is a big issue. Just like some kind of shape of the program, like what do they have, how much stuff, how many nuclear weapons do they actually have? We don't really know. We guess, and maybe like 20 to 50. So if they would give us that might help reduce the paranoia on the American side, so that we don't think, you know, they got thousands of missiles flying everywhere. I mean, there's anxiety about what they have. So if they tell us, maybe, you know, we can sort of reduce the temperature on the American side.